5 starts out with Robin, Dustin, Erica, and Steve stuck in this elevator, and they can't find a way out. They realize they need a key card to actually get out of it, but obviously they don't have one. Dustin brings up the fact, well, we can just use the elevator hatch and we'll just climb out that way. But when he does that, he realizes just how far underground they are. And we're talking stories down. They have to stay there the entire night, but in the morning they hear a noise, so they end up hiding. And that's when the Russians open up the elevator and start unpacking it. As they're about to leave, the elevator starts closing, and Steve Harrington puts that green metal canister under it so they can sneak out. They're able to do so just in the nick of time, but the elevator ends up crushing it, and when it does, the green liquid ends up corroding the floor. So now they're stuck underground, and they look to see where they're going to go, but there's only one option, and it is a long tunnel down. So they start walking, but at some point, Steve Harrington pulls Dustin aside and asks him, do you think this could correlate with what happened last year? And Dustin says, I mean, I guess so. The girls end up pulling him back in, and eventually they keep walking, and they can hear the code words that tipped him off to the Russians being there. They realize they must be close to who's ever relaying this message, and if they're close, that means on the outside can hear them. The problem is, the main hub of this building is pretty crowded with Russian soldiers. They end up seeing the control room, and they are able to sneak in, but now they have to take out the guy who's relaying the message. Steve Harrington does that. Dustin congratulates him for finally winning a fight. They steal his key card, and they're about to leave, but Robin notices a flight of stairs and follows them up. And when she does this, she sees that mechanism that was trying to reopen the gate. Now, while they deal with those Russians, Joyce and Hopper are dealing with another pair of Russians. They've gone to another property that Starcourt has bought, and sure enough, in the basement, they do find 2 guys working on something. Hopper ends up trying to take them prisoner, but the guy who originally attacked Hopper shows up, and him and Hopper get into a fight. And to best describe this guy, he's like the Russian version of the Terminator. Hopper is able to take him out by grabbing a wrench and banging it against his knee, and him and Joyce are able to escape along with one of those Russians that was originally down there. But as they're escaping, the Russian Terminator litters their truck with bullets, so they're able to escape, but their truck is in desperate need of repair, and he's hot on their trail. They end up having to park it in the middle of the woods and just walking out, and Hopper says he knows somebody in Indiana who speaks Russian, and Joyce, being annoyed, pops back, so we're just gonna walk there? And he says, no, that's not the plan. Eventually they find a 7-Eleven, and Hopper commandeers a vehicle saying it's police business, and him, Joyce, and this Russian guy take off in the Todd father's vehicle. So Joyce, Hopper, and the Russian arrive at the guy who Hopper knew speaks Russian, and it turns out to be the investigative journalist from Season 2. After he gives them a hard time about their names and what their business is, Joyce just reams him out, and it seems like he's going to help them figure out what this Russian was doing down in the basement. But Eleven has no idea where Hopper is, so she goes in the sunken place to find him. All the other kids are talking about what the next move is, and that's when Nancy bursts through the door looking for Will. Jonathan and Nancy have come to the conclusion that this woman just didn't start eating fertilizer. It must be correlated with what happened last season. Mikey explains that the mind flare probably took over Mrs. Driscoll, and that's when it dawns on them that if there's 2 of them, there's probably 4 and 8 and many more. 11 eventually brings up Heather, so they head over to her house. Nancy obviously knows that Tom is her dad, so that would explain the weird behavior that he was having the previous day. When they get to the house, they find the remnants of an attack scene. They also find a bunch of chemical products that were just torn apart the house. Max asks, Will, you weren't drinking chemical products last year, and he goes, no, but our science teacher did say if you mix 2 chemicals together, you get a different result. And obviously the mind flare is trying to do that. Jonathan says they must have been taken somewhere because nobody's in the house. And 11 says, well, it must be somewhere they don't want me to see. Nancy brings up the fact that Mrs. Driscoll kept saying, I have to go back. So we need to find out where exactly back is. And that's when Will says, look, if she wants to go back so bad, let her do it and it'll lead us right to them. All the kids end up heading to the hospital, but only 2 are allowed up for visitation. So Nancy and Jonathan head up, but Mrs. Driscoll isn't there. Who is there, however, is Tom and one of his douchey writers from the newspaper. Tom, the editor-in-chief of the Hawkins Post, has blood all over his hands and he starts stalking them down. Jonathan ends up getting taken out by the coworker, but Nancy is able to get away, and when this happens, the coworker ends up stalking Nancy. As Jonathan lays on the floor, Tom comes over to finish him off, but right before he's able to do it, he starts acting like he's in pain, and the reason is because Nancy is taking out the coworker. And it seems like once you hurt one of them, you're kind of hurting all of them. So Nancy and Jonathan both end up killing Tom and the other douchey reporter. But when this happens, their bodies end up turning into that liquid, and it ends up creeping down the hall and meeting up and forming the mind flare. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel. If you do not see the next video up in one of the end screens, not to worry, it'll be up in the next couple days. But the most important thing is that you like and subscribe and all that good stuff.